to welcome you all to this event. It marks the start of National Poetry Month, but as I keep reminding these poets, we're celebrating the enduring power of the words that they write and they speak. And I, for one, am really grateful for all that you do. My name is Marcy Sillman. I'm a longtime arts journalist, and I co-host a podcast. It's called Double Exposure. We focus on culture and the intersection of our creatives and the general world that we live in, sometimes invisible to people who aren't conscious of it, and maybe we should be more conscious of it. I'm joined by these four poets who serve or have served as official poet representatives to state and local governments. We're envisioning this as an open conversation, and we invite you who are here with us in person to join. You have little cards on your chairs, and there's pens. You can submit your thoughts or questions to runners who are located somewhere in the room, Alex and Sajal, and then we'll sift through those, add them to the conversation. There are people here with us at Richard Hugo House, but also people watching on TVW, so we welcome you as well and wish that you were here with us asking questions. In Washington State, we stand on the ancestral homelands of 29 federally recognized Indian tribes and their people. Today, we're gathering on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the ancestral land of the Duwamish tribe. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, their dreams, and energy to making the history that led us to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hopes of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than we can count. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. I want to acknowledge the sponsors of today's event, ArtsWA and the Washington State Arts Commission and Humanities Commission. They sponsored the Washington State Poet Laureate program. Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture sponsors the Civic Poet. Seattle Arts and Lectures sponsors our Youth Poet Laureate. We're so happy to have them here. Hugo House, of course, and its staff, Daniel Tam Claiborne, Jasmine Lomax, Jason Glover. Seattle Channel, TVW, our volunteers, Sajal Akrakar, Alex Melkarik, and our event coordinator, Carol Roscoe. I want to acknowledge all of you. And, really, round of applause for them. I'm most excited to introduce our panel of poets. And I guess I'll just start at that far side. Jourdan Imani Keith is Seattle's Civic Poet. This is a position she's held, I think, for 2 years at this point, since 2019. Yeah. She's an essayist, a storyteller, a playwright, naturalist, and activist, as well as a poet. During her tenure as Civic Poet, Jourdan has focused on amplifying the voices of female-identifying BIPOC writers, as well as investigating our human connection to the waters of Puget Sound. Sitting right next to me is Rena Priest. She currently serves as Washington State's 6th Poet Laureate. It's a position she's held, I think, since the beginning of last April, so a year, and she has another full year to go in this tenure. Rena is the first Indigenous poet to serve as the State Poet Laureate. Every artist who holds this job is free to put his or her spin on it, and Rena has two goals: to celebrate poetry with our state's tribal communities and to celebrate the natural world and the threats that face it. Thank you for being here. We have another former Poet Laureate. I think you were the 4th Poet Laureate, Tod Marshall. We tried to go back. He held that tenure from 2016 to 2018, and during that term, he edited an anthology of work by poets from around the state. Tod is a poet and a professor at Gonzaga University and a proud Jayhawk. Do you want to just say briefly why your Rock Chalk Jayhawk shirt is so important to you today?
Sure. So besides competing in the Final Four, the Jayhawk has in my mind, a really powerful history based on the sparrowhawk and the blue jay, two birds indigenous to Kansas. The word somehow came to be associated with those in Kansas who fought against Kansas becoming a slavery state. They had numerous battles against various Missourians, Quantrill's Raiders, probably most famously, and Lawrence, where the university was burnt down 4 or 5 times. Finally, the Kansans got into their head that wood might not be the material to burn or to build the town out of, and so they started using a very yellowed limestone, and hence rock chalk Jayhawk.
Thank you, and it's good. I think we should have all come in some sort of meaningful garmentry, but that one's pretty great. Last, by no means least, please welcome Zinnia Hansen. She's currently Seattle's Youth Poet Laureate. In addition to being a student at the University of Washington, I think you're in your first year at the university. Zinnia, as well as being a poet, she's an essayist, and she's in the process of writing a book to be published later this spring. So look forward to that. This is a hybrid event. I know some people wanted it to be a poetry reading. Some people wanted it to be a conversation, but we have a lot of poetry, and we're going to start with some work from Jourdan Imani Keith.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. How are you? You have to, after Zoom, where you can't really ask the humans how they are, so. Apologize. We're asked to read for 3 to 5 minutes, and I don't have short poems because I talk a lot. So
it's okay, Jourdan. It's okay. You just go.
Well, I'm being respectful, so I will be editing this poem, and I encourage you to watch it on YouTube. It's called Let Seattle Be, after Langston Hughes. Let Seattle be Seattle, the place that was and is and will be. Seattle has become a home for me, among the shackled and the free. The place where trees once stood before there was a neighborhood. Seattle was the cedar's majesty, before the plains and glass spines scraped the sky. She was the mother in her children's eyes, before the hills were pushed into the sand. This was and is and will be Duwamish land. Let Seattle be Seattle, a chief's name on foreign tongues. Seattle recognized and sung by dolphins we call killer whales, before they too are gone. A sanctuary city in a filled-in estuary. Let Seattle be hope in this hope-broken land. A shelter and a refuge, a fist to stop a tyrant's hand. Seattle, your tectonic faults are great. See the last one leaving, turn out the lights. See the home of war and the flight. See the gold rush and the sourdough bread. See the Issei and the Nisei of the Panama Hotel, 7,000 gone by what a president said. See how Hooverville returns again and again. See old covenants outside of the International District and CD. See where no Asians and no Africans could be. How more than others we still live without the trees. Old gray blanket on the streets and in the sky. See the tents, the sweeps, and totem poles. Seattle, remember too the change you are and want to be. Say, who are you in the sailor's sea, pushed back, pushed aside for prosperity? I am the Black River gone as the people cried. I am the Chinook dead on the side. I am the orca carrying her child. I'm the gray whale beached at Alki. I am your neighbor without shelter in the sand. Oh, but Seattle is mighty, even in its broken dreams. Oh, Seattle, is mighty when it looks in its own eyes? What city do you know that fights itself to undo its present harms? What city do you know that sounds its own alarms? What city do you know that was raised by colonizers, that turns itself upon itself to put out ancient fires? This place of wooded paths and parks that must belong to all. This place where we drink the water from protected Cedar Falls. This place where race and social justice is built into the law. This place where you are taught to understand the power of it all. The power of illusion that there are racial lines. The power of illusion that's kept us all behind. So sing, sing, sing what's right, Seattle. Sing. Thank you.
You are sitting in a line, and normally panels are events where the person in my position asks a question and then asks another question and then asks another question, and I'm hoping that we don't have to be quite so formal with that, and that you will speak to each other and with the audience as well. I want to talk a little bit first, while I'm absorbing that poem, what I was thinking, besides loving your words, Jourdan, was wondering when you wrote it, because you hold an official position. So was this written prior to that? And more beyond that, I guess, I'm wondering about the responsibility that an official poet holds. What is that role? What do you do? What kind of responsibilities do you feel?
Thank you. So the poem was written, as most of a lot of my work is commissioned, and so the Mayor's Arts Awards, that's how the kickoff for the Civic Poet begins. So I wrote that thinking, hey, I'll use Langston Hughes' poem as a model. That'll be great. Oh my gosh, that was so hard. Live and learn. And so that was written in response to that. And of course, at that time in 2019, many of us, terrified about what might happen in the 2020 election. And our mayor at that time took quite a stand. And we felt quite a brunt here in Seattle. So that was what that was in response to. I've been blessed and thankful to you all to hold this role more than once. I was Seattle Poet Populist in 2006, 2007, and that was an elected role to represent the city. So, and all of that civic engagement is critical, and I research my work to understand our city, the people that have lived here, and the land, how it's been changed and how it is, and how that impacts our lives, our habitat as humans and as the other species we share it with. So that's what I see my role as civic poet.
What it was that you wanted to do with it?
Well, I guess that I decided I would try to bring poetry to as many people and as many communities throughout our state as I could. And so doing, I put something like 55,000 miles on my Subaru, visiting small towns and visiting our major cities, visiting high school and elementary schools, universities. And I think that over the course of my service, my mission changed a little bit from getting people that I met to appreciate poetry, acknowledge the importance of poetry, to thinking about finding words that matter to them. And I think that perhaps the refocusing had something to do with the presidency of the time, when language was being debased in so many different ways. And it also had something to do with not everyone that I encountered showing a profound love for poetry. But many of the people that I encountered had words that were very dear to them, whether they were psalms, the Bill of Rights, or something that their grandmother told them before she passed away. And so trying to ask them to think about those words, and in my mind, the best way that you can honor words is by taking them to heart and trying to memorize those words and keep them inside of them became probably, in my mind, the most important part of my service.
Rena, you told me before we came on the stage that discussing poetry is not your favorite thing, that you like to speak through the words that you write, but you're not a private poet as you hold this job, so I'm wondering how you contemplated what you wanted to do with it.
Yeah, so I actually set out the goal for my vision for my time in this position in the application process. It was lengthy, and it offered a lot of opportunity to reflect on how I envisioned my tenure going if I were to be selected, as well as what poetry has meant to me throughout my life. And so that was done in advance of being selected.
And so Tod's talked about how during his tenure, his goal evolved. Do you see any changes as you've held this position for 12 months?
No, I think that my goals are still the same, and I've had to come up with some creative ways of carrying them out with COVID times happening and everything. But I have had some assistance. I partnered with Riverways, which is a wonderful program through the University of Washington's education degree, and they invited me to set the theme for this year's curriculum and to make some videos to share in the communities that they serve. They serve, I think, 11 different tribal and rural communities throughout Washington State, and reach, I think, something like 1,200 youth through their activities, and they put together an anthology of the children's poetry. And so it was really cool to be able to see, Christine was the person coordinating it, but to see some of the things that she would send back about what the kids were saying about poetry and the theme and the activities and stuff that we worked on together. It was really cool. So, yeah. So,
of the positions represented up here, I know the least about what Seattle Youth Poet Laureate does. Do you have, Zinnia's particular responsibilities? What is your role?
Yeah, so it's really just sort of, I see the role as poetry being central to it, and it's a way to, reach out to people, my peers, young people, about poetry, and also just kind of bring a young person's voice into the, poetic world, literary world, and also the world of social justice. On a personal level, I really do see the poetry as central, and I think that social justice and poetry is often conflated, especially when it comes to the voices of young poets. You have to save the world, right? And while I see that as a really important aspect of the work, I also see room for just the pure beauty and power and passion of poetry, and kind of, I think there's room for that. So, and that's kind of where I've landed.
I think that you raise a really important issue. The creation of poetry and the experience of poetry is often a very personal one, something that is connected to the moment that we're emotionally living in the world, and the bridge from that to some sort of public discourse, some sort of social activism can be a really difficult bridge to make.
As I mentioned, this is very much a hybrid event, and Tod, now we go back to the share a poem part of it, the reading portion of it. So it's your turn. It's up to you now.
So there must be Langston Hughes energy in the air. I'm talking about Langston Hughes to my students at Gonzaga, and so I decided to make a montage of sorts. I have met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces, from counter or desk among gray, 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head, or polite meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said polite meaningless words, and thought before I had done of a mocking tale or a jibe to please a companion around the fire at the club, being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn. All changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. Ita Strauss, a young woman of 19, was pulled by Lithuanian policemen to a long pit in the Ponary forest. She had heard the firing of the guns and now could see the rows of corpses. She stood with others naked at the edge of the trench as the bullets flew past her head and body. She fell straight backward, not feigning death, simply from fright. She remained motionless as one body after another fell on top of her. When the pit was full, someone walked on top of the final layer of corpses, firing downward into the heap. A bullet passed through Ita's hand, but she made no sound. Earth was thrown over the pit. She waited for as long as she could, and then pushed her way through the bodies and dug through the soil. Without clothing, covered only in mud and in the blood of herself and others, she sought help. She visited one cottage and was turned away, and then a second, and then a third. In the fourth cottage, she found help, and she survived. Diane DePrima, Revolutionary Letter number 23. A lack of faith is simply a lack of courage. One who says, "I wish I could believe that," means simply that he is a coward, is pleased to be a spectator. On this scene where there are no spectators, where all hands not actually working are working against, as they lie idle, folded up in lap, or holding newspapers full of lies, or wrapped around steering wheel on one more pleasure trip. Resolution: to say thank you to the wind each day and to remember the strangeness of geese by the carousel near the river that aggressively waddle for popcorn my 3-year-old niece tosses in handfuls until she spooks at one big goose and hides behind my knees while I block the birds from pecking her tiny hand. You may say, some days don't rate a thank you. Fill your list. Mine includes torture, war, poverty, disease, my own achy joints, thinning hair, neglected teeth, and lingering issues from childhood. You know what I'm talking about. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you walk the Buddha's path, climb Jacob's ladder, live the golden rule like a blurred halo around your head, spinning glow of a carnival ride where kids never get sick, parents never get bored. I doubt it. I've tried enlightenment. After surgery, I once saw seraphim strings connecting everything into a tender palm of light. That was mystical and intense, or something connected to too much anesthetic. Behind my legs, Jane says, they're mean. And when we're far enough away from the birds, I squat down and look her in the eyes and say, some of them might be mean, but mostly they're hungry. Over by the water, a huge gray goose hisses and flaps its wings. Jane looks up at me, nervous, hesitant to trust even her favorite uncle, who always sneaks her Skittles and Tootsie Rolls and never says no when she wants to play hide and seek. And then she smiles, thank you, and I extend my hand, thank you. And she takes 3 fingers, and we walk away from geese, away from the dark river, from tigers and horses that chase each other forever in a circle of jangly light. More to go. The last poem that I would like to read is by Lucille Clifton. First one is Yeats, then Diane DePrima. The excerpt was from Timothy Snyder's The Black Earth, and then Diana DePrima, one of my own, and this is Birthday by Lucille Clifton. Birthday. Today where possible, the morning green and laundry sweet opens itself, and we enter blind and mewling. Everything waits for us. the snow kingdom sparkling and silent in its glacial cap, the cane field shining and sweet in the sun-drenched south. As the day arrives, with all its clumsy blessings, what we will become waits in us like an ache.
Really, thank you. I'm happy that you chose that sort of variety of voices, because it reminded me again of all the things that poetry can do. There are lots of different powers that it has. Sometimes I personally read poetry and react to something that says what's in my heart that I can't say. A poet can say it for me, and that's what I love so much. But it can also connect us, as the first poem, or I think it was the second poem, about the woman laying down and being shot without a sound, about the power that an artist, a poet in this case, but all artists have, to magnify the human condition, to magnify particular things that are going on. And we are speaking, I believe, 6 weeks after Russia invaded the sovereign nation of Ukraine, and we have watched a performer who is the president of that country use his art to rally both his countrymen and world opinion. And then I think to other artists, Václav Havel, a poet who helped forge a revolution and create the Czech Republic. And I wanted you all to reflect on the skills that artists, wordsmiths, yourselves bring to both, contemporary politics, but also to the human condition. What you can do that a reporter, a journalist can't. What you bring to the table. Anyone's welcome to jump in first.
So I read this question, and I immediately thought of this poem by Brecht. It's called The Burning of the Books. When the regime commanded the unlawful books to be burned, teams of dull oxen hauled huge cartloads to the bonfires. Then a banished writer, one of the best, scanning the list of excommunicated texts, became enraged. He'd been excluded. He rushed to his desk full of contemptuous wrath to write fierce letters to the morons in power. "Burn me," he wrote with his blazing pen. "Haven't I always reported the truth? Now here you are, treating me like a liar. Burn me." So, I think that it's powerful the way that poetry has the ability to connect to the things within us, the mysteries within us, feelings, the things that we feel deeply, our values. Poetry can shape value systems. It has, a story has the power to change the world, really. And so this is why, during totalitarian regimes and things like that, they go after the writers and the poets. And this is why it's so important in a healthy democracy to fund poetry and the arts, because this is, the celebration of our humanity makes it more difficult to turn our backs on it and destroy it and do harmful things to one another. So I think that's a good question. Thanks.
Jourdan and Zinnia, you both work in other written forms, essays. So are there certain things that a poem can convey that an essay can't?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that a little bit. I don't know, I think a lot of things that we don't often think of as poetry can qualify as poetry. I don't know, I love the essay form because it's this sort of rigid form and I get to subvert it, right? I get to play with that form and also break that form apart. I was also thinking recently, this is a little bit off topic, but I was thinking about, there's this musician that I really love, Sufian Stevens, and I've been listening to a lot of his his music recently, and it feels like very much poetry to me. And I think what makes it feel so much like poetry is the fact that he's able to hold two truths at once. He's able to hold two seemingly contradictory ideas true at once. And I think there's a real power to that, because in some ways you can speak to two audiences. So like, his poetry is often profoundly religious and like I don't know, it draws on a lot of Christian themes in the Bible, and it's also queer. And that's a really powerful thing, because he's able to speak to two audiences, but he's also able to, and like through that, kind of depoliticalize it in a weird way. Like, I don't know, there's this one song where, I don't know, just the line is blurred to whether he's like talking about God or a lover. And I think, I don't know, poetry just can address the love there instead of, I don't know, it's, and that's yeah, pretty powerful.
You can hold two truths at once, and I think that really resonates with me as a way of thinking about poetry. Jourdan, does it, when you're thinking about something that you want to express, are there things that must be poems and things that must be an essay?
Well, I did have a point in my life where I started writing essays because I felt that it was necessary. When people ask me what I write, I say, what is necessary? And after being chastised by Sonia Sanchez publicly, I learned to accept this weird thing that was coming out called prose. Braided essays I do love because they allow all the fragments of who I am and the way I think to have a place that is whole. When you ask this question, I think about my project, the Civic Poet work of Women in Wales. My project title is Women in Wales First, Poetry in a Climate of Change. So in the title alone, I'm forcing you to move away from jokes about women in Wales, which I first experienced. I have an excerpt I'm going to respond with. It's called In the Body of the Sound. And I'm going to not assume that people know who Henrietta Lacks is. Can you, raise your hand if you know who Henrietta Lacks is? So some do and some don't. So basically, we would all be dead if Henrietta Lacks wasn't dead. Henrietta Lacks' cervical cancer was taken out. They were trying to grow it in a dish and see these cells that would multiply. Rebecca Skloot wrote a book about her and the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. And so every medical breakthrough is using this black woman's cells, including I would think the vaccines that were taken. So I encourage you, and I'm just going to read this little bit. In the body of the sound, tell us we are winning, so my bones don't rattle my skin. Is it only the whales with remnant appendages, or are my children also my ancestors swallowing detritus? Tell me, so my bones don't rattle my skin. My eyes have been weaponized like orca, like salmon, hungry, and are my children also my ancestors swallowing detritus, stuck between seen and unseen? My eyes weaponized like marrow, like salmon, hungry, like Henrietta Lacks. My DNA caged, stuck between seen and unseen, drowned in the body of the sound, like orcas filled with stones, like Henrietta Lacks. My DNA caged. So that's my answer, because this is an excerpt of, thank you, this is an excerpt of Pantun, which I've been teaching people so that you can weave things that the world has told us are separate. And that in our poems we can condense through illusion, which you're really not so much to do in journalistic writing.
No, you are not.
Essay.
No.
Although there's so much that has changed in what is accepted as even a journal entry, and I've found home in that. So journal entries meaning like newspaper articles have.
Right. You said you write what's necessary, and that got me to thinking a little bit about the four of you. And I ask artists in various media this kind of question, but did you choose words, or do words choose you? I'm curious.
I think words chose me.
You needed to write?
I think so. Yeah. Well, I just always loved the sound of words. The music of the human language is just so beautiful. I love listening to people talk. I love listening to people sing. I love the way that different languages have different words for, that carry meanings that might be completely foreign as a concept in another language. Like, it's just really powerful. Yeah.
Any of the rest of you want to take on that question?
Yeah. I think it's both true that a picture contains 1,000 words and a word contains 1,000 pictures. And I don't know, I like words.
I'm with you.
I'm afraid to talk here because I'm kind of following the go right down the line dynamic that we said
You
we
can
would
talk
avoid.
next, yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful poem of our moment so much. And I think, Zinnia, you send us in a great direction that goes back to Marcy's question. I think that ambiguous language that we can inhabit and share perhaps with the artist who gave us that language is really different from political discourse, which usually has one aim, one focus, one outcome that the writer is aiming at. I was looking at these great speeches throughout history and thinking I just talked about riches claiming an education with my students. I think one of the most powerful speeches that I know, and juxtaposing it with the Reichstag speech and thinking about the kind of mono energy of that horrific historical moment. So I think poetry makes room for us to dwell in it, whereas sometimes political discourse, maybe even Zelensky's discourse, has a single aim.
Another thing about words, it's like just about how powerful they are, is I've been thinking about how, I don't know if any of you saw the Oscars, just to go there, but like we all got to see what happened, but none of us got to hear like what happened, right? It's like you can't hear, we can all see on TV anytime during the day, bombed out buildings, murder, mayhem, and violence of any kind. We can just witness it like with our eyeballs, but we certainly cannot hear anybody ever say the F word. God forbid. But like, and other things too, it's just kind of talking about the power of language and why I think that this medium, words, they call to me, and it's because of that, right? Connecting, sharing, whatever, yeah.
I'm going to give the honest answer that I have in a poem, but I'm not going to read the poem. I've accepted. I began writing poetry to get girls. I began writing poetry.
Did it work?
Several times. But when I was in 7th grade, my book that they taught us about sex ed was called Love and Sex in Plain Language. When I looked in the back, as my feelings were budding, it was slow, it was like 7th grade or whatever, 8th, I said, homosexual, no longer considered a mental illness. That's all it said. And I felt like, does everybody know that I looked at the back of the book? It was horrible. And so I started writing. And I feel in that way, I mean, I somewhat joke, but grandfather was a writer, and I've noticed a similar obsession. His book was called From Bondage They Came. It's very flowery, but it's examining Virginia in 1619. And so I think DNA-wise, it was passed to me to examine some silences that are really far inside of me.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about there's words and there's lots of different ways to put them together to say what you want to say. But there are so many cultures on this planet whose cultures have been transmitted through the spoken word. It's not just histories and books. It's the griot tradition. It's passing the story from one generation to the next. And in the 21st century, as we're approaching the middle of the 21st century, it feels to me that, I believe in the power of art. That's my religion, the power of art. But it feels that you hold that truth teller and that cultural bearing role. And I'm curious if you feel that responsibility through the things that you write, or whether it is more, I know, Jourdan, you've gone beyond trying to get girls, or maybe you still try to get girls with your poems.
Currently available.
Okay, she's currently available. And you've heard some of that work, so it entices contact. But seriously, you're holding political or appointed positions, not political positions. They're appointed positions. So does that add an onus to what you do or how you think about what you do? Tod, you don't really hold that position anymore, but you did. Zinnia?
I think there's a world-building aspect to it. I don't know if I started writing poetry to get girls, but that struck me because it's hard to find queer love poems. Or it's hard to find queer love stories. Actually, there's a lot of queer love poems. But that, in this sort of creation, a kind of a creation of a new kind of love, is really important and central to, my work. And so I see that also with what you were talking about. Just as, not just to address issues that are there, but also to, build something new. I don't think that poetry always has to be in response. I think it is always in response, but it's a part of it. But there's also this kind of world-building aspect to it as well.
Did you get girls?
Oh my goodness, we're turning into a completely different kind of forum here. You represent the state in your poetry, but you're also really interested in this tenure to bring poetry to various tribal communities. And I'm struck by what Zinnia said about building something. It seems that that must ring true somewhat to you.
Yeah, so I, as I've occupied this position, I've written some poems about, repatriating my own tribal language, which has been deeply meaningful to me, and has built my understanding of the world and shaped it, and I think in useful ways that could be useful to culture at large. For example, thinking about some of the words in our tribal language and the values that those embody. Like we talk about the cottonwood tree. The word for that is Quayalach-each, which means the dancing tree. And that's very different from cotton and wood, which are commodities that you cut it down, you burn it, you use it. It's for human consumption, and it doesn't have a life of its own, where Quayalach-each, it gives you the image of a living thing occupying its own space in the world, and you can kind of see in your mind the image of the cottonwood swaying in the breeze, and the way it has the little silver leaves on the bottom and green on the top, and they shimmy, and it's just really pretty. And so you have to acknowledge it as its own autonomous being with a purpose in life that's exclusive of human purposes. And so, that's really the power of language. And in learning my tribal language, some of what I've gotten out of that I think could be useful in building a new worldview for others.
Did you grow up speaking that language or hearing it?
I grew up hearing it, but not much. And I was offered an opportunity to learn it early on in my journey through college. And I thought, well, I should probably try to take Spanish so I can get into like this school or whatever. And, and so I did that, and I really regret it because, I don't know Spanish. But also because I lost out on this amazing opportunity to work with some of our tribal elders who were willing to teach me, and also not really understanding culturally what an insult that was to them at the time, because I was young and had my eye on like what the rest of my life was going to be, and there's like that is a contradictory worldview as well. So.
And there's the power of words in disappearing languages when they're not transmitted.
Definitely, yeah.
Can you say the name of the tree again?
KUOW. And then our word for killer whales, which is a totally different way to understand them, those are our relatives under the sea, our relatives under the waves. So they're people, right? They're the people who live under the waves. And that's a lot different than killer whale.
Clearly we have to have another conversation just about this. I want to go to a poem now. And Zinnia, will you share something with us?
Yeah. Okay. So I have 3 short poems. The first is called The Statue, the Substance, and the Song. I sat down to write something feminist, but instead I'll tell a creation story. The first bronze statue ever cast, ever baptized in the furnace, was of a girl dancing. Late at night, I think about pulling open her hot metal lips, reaching for the flicker of a flame trapped inside. Sometimes I want to break the wind-up ballerina on my bedside table, but other times I simply want to set her spinning. This spring, I'll remember how we used to lay on the grass, waiting until the cherry blossoms slipped off their skirts. Free. I don't want to be free, because the seasons always start again, and it's a glorious thing to be stuck in a circle, spiraling inwards towards God, or perhaps the lightning strike that began it all. You know, when we love woman on woman, window and wilderness, we crack open the sky, resurrect all the dead birds. God may be the center of the circle, but Sophia, she is the circle herself, the statue, the substance, and the song. The next poem I have is called Frozen America. I imagine my brand new copy of the Best American Poetry 2021 lying stiff and silent after the apocalypse. I'd like to remain conservative a little longer. Save seed for winter, watch it sprout in the spring. I break bread by myself, sitting on the floor, hunched over by the fire like God's lap cat, watching it snow. I'm hoping another ice age will give us room to thaw again. Our Christmas tree this year was 13 feet tall. I was just grateful I couldn't reach the top. Sometimes I want God to step out from the center of the sun, but other times I want him to stay there, pinned and uncomfortable. This winter, I've noticed how the sky grows blue every young night, how it's growing, inching that much closer to everything. I'm thinking about how close blue is to orange. I'm thinking about how the snow hasn't stopped falling, about how I want to make a perfume out of all our empty orange peels, about how the mountains will melt into mud. On the unfinished walls of the century-old hardware store my grandparents turned into a home are the portraits of the salmon they caught. More than alive, the fish tread water in their frames, open mouths, a gateway to heaven. Glorious iconography, a paintbrush, a pen, a knife. I walk through the storm, and I look back and see the windows tinted red with light. Holy. The flags are flying, flopping like dying fish as they learn how to breathe. Who's going to cut a hole in the horizon and let out the frozen smoke? And then I have one more. Black velvet. Someone take a knife to the sky, slash it open like it's a piggy bank, and start counting change. I want to catalog everything I've ever prayed for. Stranded on the mountaintop after the flood, Noah had only 1 grain of wheat left. He left the seed on the dirt on the deck of his new raft. Then, imagining it was God, he split the seed with a pickaxe. The Big Bang wasn't so much a beginning as infinity realized. Last night, my roommate was folding clothes by the light of their phone. I was listening to Bach and imagining gardens growing wild, roses with their roots on fire. There are so many different shades of mystery, more layers than a Victorian woman's underwear. Bach is perfectly succinct, yet his music never truly stops. Stoplights and highways, the city outside my window is bare to its being. Bare like piano keys, burned down to the bone by the acid of their road song. I'm awake. Night sky is a storage space for everything that was lost in the flood, for all the rainstorms that let loose too early. It's sagging, held up by a single C note. I keep throwing spears into an impenetrable, pregnable monotony. Keep listening to the songs they sing as they fly towards their graves. The songs they sing into the black velvet draped over their graves.
Thank you, Zinnia. So I can't remember, Tod, it was you, I think, who said earlier that you had this idea that you were going to travel around the state as poet laureate and have everybody celebrate their love of poetry, and you found that not that many people, fewer people, I guess, than you expected, love poetry. But I'm listening to I love poetry. Let me just say it right there. And listening to 3 of you so far, and we will hear from Rena as well, I wonder, from your positions, if you see more people engaging with the words that you write, if the words that you write have a power to get people to dream or to build a world or to think about the dancing tree or our friend who lives under the waves, our relative who lives under the waves. Are you seeing that there's more appreciation for poetry in all its many permutations? Jourdan?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I admire quite a few other poets who have married the performance aspect with a very strong stage and print presence. And because of them, I feel that people have come to really, I'm going to say, dance inside of poems, to really find a place to live. And also some of the more sobering work, I think, Deaf Republic, if you all haven't read Ilya Kaminsky's book, is everything that you were talking about in that Ukraine question. And I read it probably a year and a half ago, and it reminded me of Augusta Boal's work, who used theater to run the government when people have been made to understand that they must be silent and they won't speak. And so in those ways, where our poems have come to be more performative of the silences, I think.
More performative of the silences. That's a interesting and beautiful way to put it, because it seems to me that that's the power that you hold in the way that you put your words together, is to, it may be political silences, it may be impose silences. But sometimes I feel like it's just the silence because I don't have those words to say those things. But you all have that. And you can say something that will resonate with your heart, but also with an audience's heart. And it seems that's where the power is in what you do.
Can I say something a little contrary?
Absolutely.
So that excerpt from Timothy Snyder's Black Earth that I read raises this really powerful question that I sometimes put to students, but that I think all of us have to answer, and I think it's a really difficult one to answer, the who lives in the fourth cottage question. And sometimes with students at Gonzaga, we talk, I'll say, well, I hope and I bet that the person that lives in the fourth cottage is someone who comes from exposure to the humanities, where they have encountered otherness, where they have opened their heart through poetry, where they have cultivated themselves through the fine arts. But I think that there are so many examples of poets whose work has, especially those that saw themselves as culture bearers, that have ended up in really misguided pursuits. I think of two examples come to mind, and it might be that the most immediate examples at hand are men, but I also think there's some asterisks next to my favorite poet, not my favorite poet, one of my favorite poets, Gertrude Stein, and her deeds during the Second World War. But the two that I was thinking of were Ezra Pound and Baraka, Amiri Baraka, who in his poem Black Art has many virulent anti-Semitic lines, and of course at the beginning of, or about a decade ago, the poem, if I'm remembering the title correctly, Who Brought Down the Towers, also is rife with anti-Semitism. So I guess what I'm saying is I feel as if we're getting on a little shaky ground, because some people that have opened themselves to the world of words have ended up in pretty disturbing places.
Rena?
So I was thinking about your question as to whether or not poetry has, whether or not I've noticed that poetry has been. So let's see. Sorry, I'm thinking too many things at once. Let's just go on. I'll collect my thoughts and then I'll say it better later.
That sounds good. I want to follow up on that. No, Jourdan, you go.
Well, I wanted to follow up with the comment about Baraka. He was the New Jersey Poet Laureate when he wrote that poem, and I believe he was the first and then the last. Because in his tenure, they decided, we don't want you to say that. And I think, and these are not my words, and I wish I could attribute it to the person at Port Townsend who did a really great job of pointing out there are many poets historically in this country that are like, they drink bigot soup. I mean, they just are like exuding bigotry in their lives and in their work. There are some people who are allowed to be bigots, and their work is still amazing. And we just teach it and love it and never bring it up. And then there's others who aren't allowed. And I don't support bigotry, but who amongst us couldn't have something pointed at and say, like, you're a hater, as the kids say. You're a hater.
But it also, that brings up what both of you are talking about, the power of those words, whether they're inspirational or aspirational, or they could wound somebody. There is a power in putting them together and having those words out in the world. And I always think when I talk to poets about the way that poetry was taught to me as a child in school many, many, many years ago, and it was an other. It was a thing that existed over here that was not part of our lives. It wasn't part of the world that we lived in. It was rare and precious, and that's not really true, whether for good or wounding. The world of poetry, the world of the written and spoken poem, is, I don't think you can separate it, and you're just proving that point again, I think.
So I collected my thoughts.
Okay, good.
So what I'm thinking about is that when I give interviews, people often ask, because I write about, the perils facing us in the natural world with climate change and everything, and people always ask, how do you stay hopeful? Like, because, when you write poetry, it kind of sometimes feels like you're screaming into the void a little bit. The feeling here that I have to convey, which is always my answer, is that you just have to keep doing it, because, what are you going to do? Give up? Like, just give up and not say the things that need to be said, and to just, I guess, go quietly into that good night. No, right? Thinking about whether or not poetry is making a difference, I think it definitely is making a difference always. And for people, poets who have used their art for evil, then that sucks. But that's definitely the world we live in, unfortunately. Yeah. So.
Well, so then, everybody has their own truth, and I hesitate to say that because we've heard so much over the past 6 years about fake news. This is something that impacted me as a journalist. Like, we like to think that we're telling truth, but truth is subjective. So I suppose Ezra Pound was telling his truth in his poetry, and Gertrude Stein told her truth. You tell your truths, correct?
Yeah, I think that's, in some ways, poetry is telling a personal truth. Or not necessarily truth. I get frustrated with the constant epistemological frame that we always apply to everything. But, I think a poem it's an image of the world with certain things highlighted and certain things blown out of proportion and certain things warped and distorted and everything. But it's sort of it's doing a similar thing to a painting or a piece of cubist art in that way, right? It's this kind of subjective truth. But I don't know. I was thinking about what you were saying, and I don't really know how this ties, but there's this, my favorite poet is Federico Garcia Lorca, and he has this one line where he declares, I don't know if I'm going to get it perfectly, but he declares, I'm an anarchist, traditionalist, communist, monarchist, da-da-dee-da-da-dee-da, and there's all of these, right, very extreme, passionate worldviews all being, held at once, I guess. And in that, it's sort of a joke, but it's also, I don't know, he's sort of showing his true commitment is to passion in that way. And I think there's a real power to passion. It doesn't even matter where that, it does matter. It really matters where that passion is directed. But, on a certain level, I don't know. There's I was thinking of Amanda Gorman, and reading at the inauguration, and how that really, I feel like it got a lot of people interested in poetry who never would have come across it otherwise. And I don't know. I write and consume a very different kind of poetry than what she writes, and but I have an immense appreciation for it, and And I think there's this kind of collective spirit that it can, I don't know, it's a galvanizing force, right? Hearing someone passionately exclaim something, and whether or not you agree with that thing, you can agree with. I'm babbling now, but yes, you get the point.
No, you're not. I think that is Tod. Did you had something?
Just one thing. Lorca's large. He contains multitudes, and of course, he also contains duende, and so bullfighter dance. George, I think you made an excellent point about some people that offend are eliminated from the canon. Some people that offend have incredibly severe consequences, while other people are still included in anthologies or included in public talk about poetry. And so I think that's a great observation about Baraka. That's all I want to say.
We did ask you to submit questions or comments, and I don't know if there are any. And you can bring them to me if there are. But in the meantime, Rena, I've been waiting so much to hear your poetry, so please share with us.
Cool. Okay. So one thing about this role is that we write poetry and present poetry that is for a wider audience than what a non-public poet might do, right? And I thought, oh gosh, Rena, is that censorship? I don't know. So I kind of struggled with that a little bit, and I wrote this poem. It's called "The Establishment Poet." And there's 3 things in here that I want to just kind of preface a little bit. One is that Franz Kafka says, a book must be the axe for the frozen sea inside of us. So it should be like a disaster in our lives. Emily Dickinson, when asked to define poetry, she says, if I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. And Walt Whitman says, do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Okay, and there's something about a shotgun in the first act. If you see it, it'll go off in the third act. And this bell here, let's see. All right. The establishment poet writes poems with subtle rhymes and gentle wit that has no bite, and beautiful, reassuring lines about how you are loved and the world is kind. Lines you might find printed on coffee mugs or stitched on throw pillows in sale bins at Marshall's. Lines that might make a chuggy gal sigh, well, isn't that nice? The establishment poet has no interest in axes or the frozen sea inside of you, doesn't worry about lifting off the top of your head or containing multitudes. The establishment poet does not use the word, and you can rest assured that you'll find nothing to be burned when the decent folk come to ferret out the scourge of anti-establishment poets. The establishment poet will not upset or derail you, challenge or assail you. The establishment poet will build a sweet perimeter between you and candor using iambic pentameter. The establishment poet, says the powers that be, is the perfect poet for dark times like these. So you can still say it. You can still say it all. For everybody, all the time. Live, laugh, love. Right? Okay, and then I'll just read one more, I guess.
Please.
Or maybe, one or two more. These are new, so, I won't. Okay, this one's called Miraculous. The math has been done. The fact of your existence is 700 trillion to 1, more or less. You've played the cosmic slot machine and won. Struck the freaking jackpot, my friend. So are you a miracle? Yes, I'd say so. But I'd also say that remembering to put out my trash on Wednesday is a miracle of equal magnitude. Or is it Tuesday? We must not be narrow in our definition of a miracle if we are to lead miraculous lives. The body believes in miracles. When you get goosebumps, it's the feeling of your body trying to grow hair really, really fast so that you don't get cold. Your body loves you. Will attempt a miracle to make you comfortable. If you can happen and I can happen and we're all just mostly void and bent light, then it stands to reason that hunger and war and all that crummy history and your heartaches and more can all be eased by merciful, miraculous softness. Right? So that goes back to Zinnia's comment about how poetry can be one way and another, because, you know, talking about the miracle life, you're holding up the pro-lifers and the anti-warrers. I guess. Poetry for everyone. And this last poem, brand new, is called Round Dance. I've heard that a triangle is the strongest shape. Okay, perhaps, but a circle will always circle back. For its reliable tenacity, nature loves a circle. A circle is relentless. We've been going in circles on this rock for eons, a fractal making songs as generations spin along, spinning out new variations with each turn in the cycle, new tyrants, new saviors, new hungers, new flavors, new yet patently familiar. A drum is a circle, a community is a circle, a yurt, a turret, an igloo, a powwow, a pan-tomb. The hero's journey, a day, a year, the tides, the moon. An iris, a pupil, a nipple, a breast, one circle, a ripple into the next. An ovum, a cell splitting like an atom, exploding, growing, arms, legs, joys, griefs. Ascending and circling back, back, all the way back to the tomb. Dust and ash, you'll be back. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. Is it a comfort or a horror? It's both, it's everything, and it would be overwhelming. But here we are again, where we retract to void. Relax. Let the song hold you wrapped. Nature loves a circle.
Thank you. We have just a couple of minutes left, and an appropriate question, I suppose, or statement to go out on. One of our audience members wants to know, given the times that we live in, what poems are sustaining you? Y'all need a second to think that over?
No.
No? Okay, good.
So, Containing Multitudes, I spent a lot of time reading Old Testament and New Testament. And the poetry that's hidden from translation, you know, you don't always catch it, but that's what's been sustaining me. So, the word shadow, and comes up so much in that text, and wings, and the Psalms are incredible poetry, and the Song of Solomon is insane poetry. So, yep, that's about it.
I like to think I'm a little more edgy than this, but I guess not. Let's see. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Its sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird who kept so many warm.
Immediately, I say Lorca. But I also have been reading a lot of the ancient epics recently from different cultures, the Ramayana, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I don't know, I think there's something I really feel, I don't know, climate change is hard. I feel the apocalypse really keenly and that potentiality. And so I think just looking at the story of humans, and we've been thinking and coming up with stories for a long time, and that's really, really beautiful. Yeah.
My plants, I think.
Your plants are your poem?
Yeah, I think it's okay every now and then to check out from words and find the same kind of energy from different places. And I'm sure I'll come back to words, but right now words are resting.
We have, I think, about a minute left, and a couple of questions, so I don't think we can get to them all. But maybe I should have like lightning round, and I could borrow that little bell. Somebody asked, what to you are the most powerful words? So I'm not sure if that's like a single word or a collection of words, or I'm going back to the dancing tree. To me, that's just an amazing and something that I'm going to take away from this. Just hold the fact that words in different languages say different things about who we are as humans. Anybody have a word that you want to throw out?
I have a phrase of words.
Okay.
It holds me when that apocalyptic thing is happening all the time. Heavens declare the glory of the Creator. Day to day pours forth speech. Night to night reveals knowledge. There's not anywhere where their language is not heard, where their voice is not heard, or their language understood. That makes me feel like unity, especially watching the sunset at Beacon Hill.
Turning and turning in the widening Shire. No, I'm not going to go there. So I think sometimes I talk about Williams' The Red Wheelbarrow, and the part of that poem that sometimes gets neglected is so much depends upon, and thinking about everything that can come after that.
I'll preface by saying this, I'm not actually religious, but God.
That's a powerful word. I want to thank the four of you so much for this conversation today. I leave with so much in my heart and mind. This is Washington State's current Poet Laureate, Rena Priest, our Seattle Youth Poet Laureate, Zinnia Hansen. And if you're an indication of the future of words, I feel very, very optimistic. Tod Marshall is currently a professor at Gonzaga and held the position of State Poet Laureate from 2016 to 2018. And Jourdan Imani Keith is Seattle's Civic Poet. Thank you all. Thank you also to ArtsWA, the Washington State Arts Commission, and Humanities Washington for sponsoring our State Poet Laureates. Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, sponsor of Seattle's Civic Poet. Seattle Arts and Lectures, sponsoring the Seattle Youth Poet Laureate Program. Seattle Channel, TVW, Hugo House in particular, Daniel Tam Claiborne, Jasmine Lomax, Jason Glover, our volunteers, and particularly our event coordinator, Carol Roscoe. I'm Marcy Sillman, and we thank you so much for joining us today.